Lips. He looked the words over several more times, eyes filled with suspicion, but in the end, he could not find any other meaning to them. After several rounds of thought, he could only come to the conclusion he had started with. A slut, it must be an insult of some sort. Each of the 41 guild members had designed their own NPCs, so he could not understand why anyone would want to treat the NPCs they had designed themselves in this manner. Perhaps he would understand why after reading that long essay of flavor text. However, there were guild members who would come up with these unconventional designs. Albedo's designer, Tabula Smaragdina, was one of those people. Ah, is this what they call Gapmo? Tabula-san, even so, isn't a backstory like this far too much? Momonga could not help but think that. All the NPCs made by everyone were an inheritance of the guild. Designing the highest-ranked NPC Albedo in this manner made him think that Tabula Smaragdina was beyond saving. Would it be fine to change an NPC's backstory based on a personal decision? After thinking about it for some time, Momonga came to a conclusion. Should I change it? Currently, with the guild weapon in his possession, Momonga could be said to be the master of the guild. It should be all right to exercise the guildmaster's authority he had never used before. Momonga's doubts vanished like mist, as he steeled himself to right the wrongs of his guildmate. He extended the staff of Ain's Ulgown that he was holding. Normally, one would need developer tools to change a character's backstory, but through his power as guildmaster, he could directly access her settings and edit them. After some action on his console, the slut line vanished. Well, it should be like that. Momonga thought a bit more, and looked at the gap in Albedo's flavor text. I should probably fill that up. This feels a little silly. Although he was laughing at himself, he still typed out a few words on the console keyboard. The words formed a sentence. She loves Momonga. Yua, how embarrassing. Momonga covered his face with his palm. It felt as though he were designing his ideal girlfriend complete with love events for himself, which embarrassed him so much that his heart began pounding. Although he wanted to rewrite it again out of shame, in the end he changed his mind and decided against it. The game would end soon, after all, and his shame would vanish with it. Besides, the sentence he added matched the gap left by the deleted sentence exactly. It would be a shame if he deleted it and left an empty space again. Momonga sat on the throne, scanning his surroundings with eyes filled with satisfaction and a little embarrassment. He noticed that Sabas and the maids were still standing by in a dormant state. It seemed a little lonely and a little odd to have them standing motionless like that. I think there was a command for that. Momonga recalled the words he had heard before, and extended a hand before lightly bringing it down. Kneel. As one, Albedo, Sabas, and the 6 maids fell to one knee in obeisance. Good. Momonga raised his left hand to check the time. 23 hours 55 minutes and 48 seconds, he was just in time. In all likelihood, the GMs were probably flooding the public channels and setting off fireworks. Momonga, who had put his heart and soul into this place and cut off all contact with the outside world, was unaware of that. Momonga leaned against the back of the throne and slowly raised his head to look at the ceiling. He believed that even on the last day of the game, some invaders might come to Nazarick. He would wait for them. He would accept any challenges in his position as guildmaster. He had sent emails to all the guild members, but only a few had come. He would wait for them. He would welcome his comrades back in his position as guildmaster. A relic of the past, Momonga sank into thought. Although the guild now was just an empty shell, he had enjoyed his time with it. He turned his eyes to look at the huge flags hanging from the ceiling. There were 41 of them in total, the same number as there were guild members. Each of them displayed the personal symbol of each guild member. Momonga extended a bony finger and pointed to one of them. Mine. Then, he turned his attention to a nearby flag. That flag represented one of the strongest players in Ain's Ulgown, no, in all of Yggdrasil. He was the one who had started the guild, and the one who had gathered the original 9. Touch me. The symbol on the next flag he pointed to belonged to the oldest member of Ain's Ulgown, who was a lecturer in a university in real life. Shijuten Suzaku. His finger moved faster than before as he shifted to the flag, which belonged to one of the 3 female members of Ain's Ulgown. Ankoro Machimochi. Momonga fluidly recited the names of the various symbols' owners: Hirohiro, Peroroncino, Bukabukagama, Tabula Smaragdina, Warrior Takamikazuchi, Variable Talisman, Genjiro. It did not take long for him to name all 40 of his former comrades. Their names were still branded deeply in Momonga's brain. He sprawled tiredly on the throne. Yeah, it really was fun. Even though the game did not have any subscription fees, Momonga had still spent a third of his monthly salary on it. It was not because his salary was high, but because he had no other hobbies, so he funneled all his income into Yggdrasil. There was a cash gacha in the game where players could pay for a chance to win a prize. Momonga spent nearly his entire bonus on it, and barely managed to get a rare item out of the experience. When he heard that one of his guild members Yumeko had won that item for the cost of a lunch, Momonga had been so envious that he wanted to roll around on the ground. TL note, gotchas are slang for game-based lotteries or lucky draws. They're named after gashapons, which are coin-operated vending machines which randomly dispense a prize. Because almost all of Ain's Olgaun's members were productive members of society, most of them were willing to spend money on this hobby, and among them Momonga was one of the bigger spenders. He was probably one of the top few on the server. That was how dedicated he was. Adventuring was fun, but his greatest joy was found in playing with his friends. To Momonga, whose parents had passed away, and who had no friends in real life, the guild Ain's Olgaun was a shining memory of the good times he had had with his friends. And now, this guild would disappear. His heart was filled with regret and reluctance. Momonga gripped the staff of Ain's Olgaun tightly. He was just an ordinary salaryman, and he lacked the financial power or connections to change that fact. He was just another player who could only watch the closing time as it approached. The time on his watch read, 23:57. The server would shut down at midnight. There was little time left. The virtual world would end, and he would have to go back to reality the next day. That was only natural. Nobody could live in a virtual world, which was why everyone had left, one by one. Momonga sighed. He had to wake up at 4 tomorrow. He had to sleep the moment the servers shut down in order not to affect the next day's work. 23 hours 59 minutes and 35 seconds, 36, 37. Momonga set his watch to count out the seconds. 23 hours 59 minutes and 48 seconds, 49, 50. Momonga closed his eyes. 23 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds, 59. The countdown finished. He waited for the curtains to fall on his fantasy world. He waited for the automatic logout, midnight, 1,2,3. Momonga opened his eyes. He had not returned to his familiar room. This was still the throne room in Yggdrasil. What's going on? The time was right. He should have been forcibly logged out by the server shutdown. 0:00:38. It was definitely past midnight. The clock could not have gone wrong because of a system error. Confused, Momonga looked around him, searching for any clues in the vicinity. Could it be they delayed the server shutdown? Or had they extended playtime as a form of compensation? Although numerous reasons appeared in his mind, they were all far from the truth. However, the most likely reason was that an irresistible force had cropped up, and extended the server shutdown time. If that was the case, the GMs would have made an announcement. Momonga hurriedly worked to reopen the message panel he had closed, and then he stopped halfway. There was no command console. What on earth happened? Momonga was filled with panic, frustration, and suspicion, but he was also surprised by how calm he was considering the circumstances. He decided to call on other means. Forced connections that did not require a console, the chat function, a GM call, a forced logout, none of them responded. It was as though they had been deleted from the system. What the hell is going on? Momonga's angry voice echoes through the throne room, then vanished. Today was the last day of Yggdrasil, yet all these things were happening on a day that should have marked an end to the game. Was this some kind of prank they were pulling on the players? Momonga was quite unhappy that he could not meet the end of the game in style, and the words he muttered clearly illustrated the anger inside him. There should not have been any reply to his hostile suspicion. However, what's wrong, Momonga-sama? It was the first time he had heard that beautiful woman's voice. Momonga was startled, but he still kept searching for the source of the voice. When he found the one who had spoken the words just now, he was speechless. The person who had answered him was the NPC raising her head, Albedo. Part 3 Karn Village. It was located on the border of the kingdom at the Empire, near the southern tip of the Yggdrasil mountain range, just outside a patch of woodland named the Great Forest of Taub. For a frontier village of the Riestai's kingdom, its population was unexceptional, 120 souls, distributed among 25 families. The village made its living from the resources of the forest and agriculture. Apart from doctors and herbalists who came to collect herbs, the only visitors to the village were the yearly tax collectors. Time seemed to stand still for the few residents of this village. Village life was very busy even in the early hours of the morning. Villages did not possess the magical illumination of continual light, which could be found in cities, so the villagers would rise with the sun and work hard all day until the sun went down. The first thing Enri Amat did after getting up extra early in the morning was to carry water from the nearby well. Hauling water was a woman's job, and once she finished filling the big water tank in the house, that chore was complete. By this time, her mother would have prepared breakfast for their family of 4. Breakfast was barley or wheat porridge, as well as cooked vegetables. Sometimes, they would have dried fruit as well. After breakfast, she would tend the fields with her parents. Her 10-year-old sister would go into the forest to gather firewood, or help with the field work. When the bell in the middle of the village square, rang to signal noon, everyone would break for lunch. Lunch would be black bread baked several days before, as well as soup with some shredded meat jerky sprinkled in. Field work would resume after lunch, and when the sun set they would return home for dinner. For dinner, they would have the same black bread that they had for lunch, as well as bean soup. If the village's hunters managed to bag any prey, they might be able to get some meat to go with their dinner. After dinner, the family would gather around the light of the hearth fire to take care of household chores, such as mending worn or damaged clothes. They would go to sleep around 8. The girl Henri Amat was born 16 years ago, and had become a part of the village since then. She had lived these days all her life. In her heart, she wondered, how much longer will these unchanging days continue? Diamond suit today was no different from any other. After waking up, Henri went to the well to carry water. After filling her buckets at the well, she would need 3 trips to fill the house's water tank. Yash Henri rolled up her sleeves, exposing her untanned skin, which was pale and stood out. Long years of farm life ensured that although her arms looked slender and frail, they were actually very strong, with just a hint of muscle on them. The filled buckets were very heavy, but Henri hoisted them up like she always did. If the buckets were bigger, I could make fewer trips. Wouldn't that make things easier? Then again, if the buckets were bigger, I probably wouldn't be able to lift them. As Henri thought about that issue on her way back home, she heard a sound and turned to look at it. There was tension in the air over there, and the seeds of fear began sprouting in her heart. Her ears seemed to pick up something like wood being broken, and after that, a scream. It sounded like a strangled bird, but there was no way it could be a bird's call. A chill ran down Henri's spine. Unbelievable. There must be some kind of mistake. It couldn't be a human's voice. She tried to erase her unease with these thoughts, and then they vanished. She had to run to the source of the scream, because it was coming from the direction of her home. Henri cast aside the water buckets. She could not run while carrying that heavy burden. Although she nearly tripped over her long skirt, she managed to keep her balance by some stroke of luck. The sound rang through the air once more. Henri's heart lurched in her chest. There was no mistake about it, it was a human scream. She ran and ran and ran. Henri could not recall going faster than this in her life. She was running so fast that her legs were about to tangle each other up. The neighs of horses. The screams of people and shouts. These sounds were becoming clearer and clearer. In the distance, Henri could see an unfamiliar man in armor swinging his sword at a villager. The villager collapsed to the ground with a howl of pain, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, and a swift thrust from the sword dealt him a fatal blow. Morgasan. There were no strangers in a small village like this. Everyone was as close as kin. As such, Henri knew exactly who had been killed before her eyes. Mr. Morga was a loud but pleasant man. He had done nothing wrong, and did not deserve to die like this. Henri wanted to stop, but in the end she gritted her teeth and ran on. The distance that felt fairly close, while carrying water now felt like an endless stretch. As the sounds of shouts and cursing filtered into her ears, she finally saw her home before her. Dad. Mom. Nemu. Henri opened the door as she shouted for her family. She found 3 familiar faces with unfamiliar looks of fear. They were motionless. However, when Henri opened the door and entered, their faces softened, the fear replaced by relief. Henri. Are you all right? Her father hugged her in his strong arms, which were brawny and tough from field work. Ah, Henri. Her mother's gentle arms embraced her. Good, Henri's back, then we'd better flee too. The Amat family was in grave danger. They had stayed at home because they were worried about leaving Henri behind, and so they had missed the best chance to escape. The threat to their lives would be catching up with them any moment now. As she thought about that fear, it became a reality. Just as the family was about to run, a human figure appeared in the house's doorway. The man silhouetted by sunlight glittered. He was a fully armored knight whose breastplate bore the insignia of the Baharuth Empire. He held a longsword in his hand. The Baharuth Empire was a neighbor of the Riestai's kingdom, and the two of them had waged frequent wars against each other. Until recently, the flames of war were mostly limited to the region around the fortress city of Yggdrasil, and had not spread to this village. However, the quiet life they had enjoyed would end here. Henri could feel the man's cold eyes on her from between the vision slits of his helmet, as though he were counting up how many people were in Henri's family. It frightened her. The knight clenched the gauntlet holding his sword, and a creaking sound came from where metal rubbed against metal. And then, just as he was about to enter the house, Nu. Her father lunged at the man, tackling him out of the doorway, and out of the house with his momentum. Hurry up and run. Damn you. Blood streamed from a small cut on her father's face. He must have gotten hurt while bull-rushing the knight. Henri's father was rolling around as he grappled with the knight on the ground. The knight grabbed the hand of Henri's father which was holding a knife, while he in turn kept the knight from drawing his short sword. The sight of blood on the body of one of her family members made Henri's mind go white. She wavered over whether to help her father or run away. Henri. Nemu. Her mother's shouts returned Henry to her senses, and as she looked at her mother, she saw the older woman shaking her head, with a heartbreaking expression on her face. Henry grabbed her little sister's hand and ran after her mother with big strides. Guilt and hesitation clawed at her heart, but in the end, she knew they had to flee into the great forest of Tob. The neighing of horses, angry shouts, the clash of steel, and the stench of burning flesh. All these assaulted Henry's ears and nose from the direction of the village. Where had it come from? Henry ran with all her might as she tried to make sense of matters. When fleeing to an open space, she had to make her body as small as possible, or hide in the corners of houses. The violent beating of her heart chipped away at the fear that threatened to freeze her body solid. In addition, the small hand she held in hers spurred her on. Her sister. Her mother, who was running ahead of her, suddenly froze, and immediately doubled back, her hands frantically gesturing at them to run somewhere else. As Henry realized why her mother would do that, she bit her lip and forced back her tears. She clenched her little sister's hand and ran, trying desperately to get away from there, because she did not want to see what would happen next. Part 4. Is something wrong, Momonga-sama? Albedo kept asking him questions. Momonga did not know how to respond. As it was, there were far too many things he did not understand, so his thought processes short-circuited. Forgive me. Momonga could only stare dumbly at Albedo, who was standing by his side. Are you all right? Albedo's beautiful face drew close to Momonga's as she studied him. A faint fragrance entered his nostrils. The scent seemed to restore Momonga's ability to think, and his mind, which had been hitherto out of commission, slowly returned to normal. No, nothing is wrong, no, nothing. Momonga was not the sort of person who made a habit of speaking politely to dolls. However, hearing Albedo's questions instinctively made him want to respond with deference. Her movements, her speech patterns, her whole being radiated an undeniable humanity. Momonga still had the feeling that something was terribly wrong about Albedo and himself, but he had no way of understanding exactly what the problem was. All he could do in this ignorant state was to suppress his fear, shock, and other unnecessary emotions. However, Momonga was a common person, and could not do that. Just as Momonga was about to cry out, the words of one of his guild members came to mind. Panic is the seed of defeat, so you must maintain your calm and think logically. Remain calm, look beyond your surroundings, and don't waste your effort on unnecessary details, Momonga-san. As he recalled these words, Momonga slowly regained his composure. Momonga silently thanked Punito Mo, the Zhugliang of Ain's Ulgaon. Is something the matter? She was close to him now. Albedo was so close he could feel her gentle breaths. Her lovely face dimpled in an adorable way as she asked her question. Momonga, who had calmed himself after much effort, was in danger of being driven into panic again from her nearby face. That GM call function does not seem to be working. Entranced by Albedo's limpid eyes, Momonga could not help but question the NPC. In Momonga's past life, he had not received romantic attention from the opposite sex, let alone those of a sexual nature. Although he knew that she was just an NPC, he could not help but be moved by her realistic expressions and movements. However, as his passions stirred within his heart, they were quenched like they had been earlier, and he returned to normal. Momonga felt uneasy at the lack of strong emotions within himself, and he wondered if it was related to the words of his comrade from just now. But was that really the case? Momonga shook his head. Now was not the time to ponder these things. Please forgive my inability to answer the Supreme One's questions about this GM call. I apologize for not meeting your expectations. Nothing would please me more than a chance to make up for my prior mistake. Please, command me as you see fit. The two of them were conversing. There was no doubt about that. Learning this fact shocked Momonga so greatly that he could not speak. Impossible. This should have been impossible. The closest thing NPCs could come to conversations was with macroed responses to being addressed in a certain way. There was audio data for roars and cheering for players to download, but actually allowing an NPC to engage in conversation was an impossible task. Even Sabas from just now could only accept simple orders. Why had such an impossible event occurred? Was this phenomenon limited to Albedo? Momonga dismissed Albedo with a wave of his hand, and disappointment flashed across her face as she retreated. Momonga turned his eyes from her body to the butler and the 6 maids, whose heads were still lowered. Sabas. Maids. Yes. Their voices chorused out as one, and then the butler and maids raised their heads. Approach the throne. Understood. They responded as one, and then rose to their feet. After that, they proudly strode to the front of the throne before dropping to one knee and lowering their heads again. Momonga had learned 2 things from this. The first was that he did not need to specially enter commands on a keyboard. The NPCs would understand his intentions and execute his orders. The second was that Albedo was not the only one who could speak. At the very least, all of the NPCs in this room were exhibiting anomalous behavior. As Momonga thought about this, he suddenly felt that there was something very wrong about himself and Albedo. In order to discover exactly what that something was, he fixed Albedo with a piercing gaze. Is something wrong? Have I made a mistake? As he finally realized what the problem was, he did not shout, nor did he keep silent, but he simply sighed imperceptibly. That unexpected breadth of facial expressions. The reason why her mouth could move and why she could speak, POS, Cybele. Momonga hurriedly placed a hand on his mandible and spoke. His mouth was moving. This should have been impossible, going by what he knew about MMORPGs. A character's mouth would not move with their words. The basic premise was that external appearances were fixed. Because of that, facial expressions were impossible to design. In addition, Momonga's face was a skull, without a tongue or a throat. He looked down to his hands, and they were the same fleshless pair that he was used to. He could also see that he had no lungs or, indeed, any other internal organs. But then, how was he speaking? Impossible. Momonga could feel the certainty he had in the world evaporating away, replaced by an ever-growing uneasiness. He suppressed his desire to shout out and, like he expected, his surging emotions were suddenly quashed. Momonga slapped forcefully at the throne, but as he expected, no damage values appeared. What should I do? Is there anything I can do? He knew nothing about what was going on. Nobody would help him even if he got angry. Then, his first priority should be looking for clues. Sebas. He could see an earnest, sincere expression on Sebas's face. He looked like a real person. It should be fine to give him orders, right? Although he had no idea what would happen, he could assume all the NPCs in the tomb were loyal to him, right? For all he knew, the people in front of him might not be the NPCs that everyone had made together. Numerous questions rose up in his mind, floating on a sea of uneasiness, but Momonga forced aside all these emotions. In the end, the only choice he had for reconnaissance was Sebas. He glanced briefly to Albedo, but then Momonga steeled himself and decided to order Sebas out. The mental image of a department chief giving orders to his subordinates appeared in his mind. Momonga took on a superior, commanding attitude and spoke, "Exit the tomb and investigate the surrounding region. If you encounter intelligent creatures, interact peacefully with them and invite them to the tomb. Attempt to accommodate the other party as much as possible during negotiations. Do not stray more than 1 kilometer from the tomb, and avoid unnecessary combat." Understood, Momonga-sama. I will do so immediately. In Yggdrasil, NPCs made to protect a guild base could not leave it under any circumstances. However, it would seem this ironclad restriction had been overturned. No, he could only be certain of that once Sebas returned. Select one of the Pleiades to accompany you. If battle begins, retreat immediately and tell me everything you have learned. That was simply the first step. Momonga let go of the staff of Ain's Ulgaun. The staff did not fall onto the ground, but floated in the air as though someone were still holding it. This was in complete defiance of physics, but it was a common sight in the game. There were quite a few items in Yggdrasil, which would continue floating in the air when left unattended. The aura of tormented spirits seemed to cling to Momonga's hand as he let the staff go, but Momonga paid it no heed. He was long since used to that sight, or not. Thinking that the macro command would have already been built in, Momonga snapped his fingers and deactivated the aura. Momonga folded his arms. The next step would be, I should contact the game company. The game company would know the most about Momonga's present situation. The problem was actually contacting them. Normally, simply using the /shout command or a GM call would put him in touch with a GM instantly, but if these methods did not work either, message? This was a spell used to communicate in the game. Normally, its use was restricted to certain places and conditions, but perhaps he might be able to make good use of the spell in this current situation. The problem was that this spell was originally designed to communicate with other players, so it might not be able to reach a GM. And in this extraordinary situation, there was no guarantee that the spell would work either. However, he had to give it a try. Momonga was a level 100 spellcaster. If he could not cast spells, his mobility, his ability to gather information, and of course his fighting power would plummet drastically. In these unknown circumstances, he had to verify that he could use magic, and quickly. Now where can I go to test my magic? As Momonga thought about that question, he looked slowly around the throne room, and then shook his head. Although this was an emergency situation, he had no desire to conduct magical experiments in the silent, nearly sacrosanct throne room. He contemplated suitable locations for magical testing, and then a promising place came to mind. There was one more thing he wanted to confirm, in addition to his own abilities. He wanted to be certain of his authority. He had to know whether his powers and privileges as the guild master of Ain's Ulgaun still existed. Until now, all the NPCs he had met were loyal to him. However, in the great underground tomb of Nazarick, there were several NPCs with levels equal to his own. He had to make sure they were still loyal. However, Momonga glanced at the kneeling Sabas and the maids, and then at Albedo beside him. Albedo was smiling. It was a beautiful